I think that in many ways what, those fighter pilots were experiencing can be quite similar to what we experience in our daily work, that many of you work on wards where patients and situations can be highly unpredictable. And, it's very different if you're one-on-one with a patient, like in a room, but when you're out there on the ward, all kinds of things can happen. They can happen suddenly, and then you're forced to deal with it. And one of the things that we know is that when our brains are under stress because of unpredictable and potentially threatening things, it changes the way that our brains work. It changes the way that our brains process information. And in fact, what you notice is that the prefrontal cortex, and that's the part of the brain that's responsible for attending to things in our environment and processing information and making decisions, the prefrontal cortex under stress goes partially offline. Okay, that means it's functioning less effectively. And then instead of taking in the information that we need, what happens is that we fall back on more primitive emotional brain mechanisms, those so-called fight, flight, or freeze survival mechanisms. And what that means is that if we react too quickly in these kinds of situations, that we're unlikely to make the best decisions. And instead, we may be more likely to react from our own modes, because our modes are rooted in our own life experience in times when we were growing up, where we were under stress. And some of those modes represent our early pain, but some of them, the so-called bodyguard modes, the coping modes, represent how we deal with that pain, the way we learn to cope. And so that's what happens when you see escalations, like on a ward, right? The patient is in a mode, in some kind of extreme emotional state. And maybe that triggers something in you. Maybe you're not even aware that it does. And you flip into some kind of coping mode yourself. And that triggers the patient. And the patient's mode triggers you, and so on and so forth. And before you know it, the situation is getting out of hand. So how do you deal with it? How do you bring your brain back online? And that takes us to the Ori circle. Okay, so the Ori circle consists of 4 steps. The first step is observe. Okay, just like Colonel Boyd's fighter pilots. Take a moment and slow things down. Just really observe what's happening right here. And in particular, pay attention to the patient's mode or modes. Which modes am I seeing here? And focus in particular on those nonverbal cues. Like the patient's facial expression and body language, tone of voice, all these things that let you see which mode the patient is in. Okay, now just slow it down a little bit and buy yourself some time to take in the information you need about the patient's mode. And then the second step in the Ori circle is reflect. Take a moment to get in touch with yourself. What's going on inside of my body right now? Do I notice tension in my body? What do I notice with my heart rate or my respiration? Just pay attention to be aware of yourself. What am I feeling right now? Am I noticing any kind of tendency to react in certain kinds of ways? Could it be that right now, in order to cope with the situation, I'm flipping into some kind of mode? Now, what's amazing is that the moment that you stop and observe and then you reflect, already you're beginning to restore your healthy functioning. Okay, so it may seem like it costs a little bit of time. It really once you get used to it and this becomes kind of automatic, this process may only take a few seconds. You begin to restore your healthy functioning. And then the third step is recruit your healthy adult mode. And to do that, you just have to ask yourself, what do I need right now? What do I need in this situation? Do I need safety, for example? If that's the case, what do I need in order to feel safe? Do I need to have a colleague with me? Or do I need to set a limit on, the mode that I'm presented with here? Or if the patient's putting me down, do I need to sort of say something to myself to remind myself, hey, I'm okay as a human being, and, I don't need to feel one down in this situation. I don't need to feel inferior. So just say something to yourself from your healthy adult mode. And once you've done that, finally you come to the last step, and that's intervene, right? So after going through the first 3 steps, we then turn our attention back to the patient and to the patient's mode. And in effect, what we do is, it's not that we reject our own modes if we're in a mode. You're allowed to have your own mode. It's only human to have your own mode. But let's say I become very detached, for example, as a way of coping. I just notice that. I notice that I'm feeling a little numb right now. And then I say, okay, detached side of David, you can stay here with me. You're part of me. I know why you're here. You came here to help me, to help protect me in this situation. But now I'm just going to put you here on the side. I'm going to park you on the side. You can stay with me, but I'm going to kind of move you out of the center of my attention and put you in the periphery of my attention. And then I'm going to turn my attention back to the patient. And then, depending on which mode the patient is in, I adjust my intervention accordingly, because different modes require different kinds of interventions. Okay, so this is the methodology of the ORI circle.